Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Joshua Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement, and a former health commissioner here in Baltimore. Our goal is to bring evidence and experience to illuminate critical public health issues. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith Rogers, producer of Public Health on Call. Today, Stephanie Desmond talks to Joanna Cohen, who directs the Institute for Global Tobacco Control at Johns Hopkins, about recent news regarding e-cigarettes and whether some brands will be taken off the shelves for good under new FDA regulations. Let's listen. Joanna Cohen, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Today, I want to talk to you about the e-cigarettes situation in this country. There's been a lot of news about restrictions, about whether they're, are they good for us? Are they bad for us? Could you just sort of lay out the landscape for us here?
Yeah, that's a great question because it has been complicated and a lot has happened since e-cigarettes came onto the market in 2006, so quite some time ago. And what's really fascinating is that originally the FDA wanted to regulate e-cigarettes like smoking cessation drugs. And they were actually sued by an e-cigarette company. So we don't want to be regulated like as a pharmaceutical product. We want to be regulated more like cigarettes. And of course, they wanted that because cigarettes aren't very regulated. So it's a lot easier for them to, cigarettes are a harmful product. They kill half of their long-term users. So you don't really have like health standards with these products that you would have with pharmaceutical products. And actually, in 2009, the Tobacco Control Act gave the FDA jurisdiction over some tobacco products, cigarettes and smokeless tobacco. But then the following year, the court said that the FDA had to regulate e-cigarettes like tobacco products, not like pharmaceutical products. Then there's a whole process for products to be allowed to be sold. So what was set initially was that e-cigarette companies had to submit applications by 2020. So the final date for e-cigarette companies to apply to allow their products to be sold was September 2020. And the FDA said they would then have a year to review applications and make decisions. So the big date that everybody's waiting for is September 2021. And September 2021 comes, and we hear what the FDA had been dealing with. They had received over 6 million applications to sell e-cigarette devices and e-cigarette liquids. So they had a lot of paperwork to go through. And even one company had submitted an application for like almost 1 million products. So they had a lot of work to do. And so in September 2021, the FDA announced their progress in getting through these applications. And they had basically turned away a number of applications because they weren't complete. So no, it's basically no. They had, for more complete applications, they gave what it's called a marketing denial order, which means you can't sell your product. And those were to a lot of products like e-cigarette liquids with all those like fun names that are very kid-friendly, all the like unicorn and popcorn and strawberry blast and, cola and all those kinds of crazy flavors. So there were a lot of marketing denial orders for those. But what we didn't hear in September 2021 was the FDA's decisions on the most popular products, including Juul. So people are waiting. So the FDA had gone through a lot of applications, but not the ones that, are the most, people care about the most. And it was last month in June of 2022 that the Food and Drug Administration issued a marketing denial order, meaning they can't sell to Juul and all of its products. And I have to say, it was a little surprising because up until then, they had allowed a few products that were tobacco flavored, not the fancy fruit or dessert candy flavors, but a few tobacco flavored products. But the marketing denial order came in June for all of Juul products. And I can tell you what they said. Basically, the FDA said that the applications from Juul lacked sufficient evidence regarding the toxicological profile of their products. And there were concerns about insufficient and conflicting data, including regarding the genotoxicity and potentially harmful products leaching from the company's e-liquid pods. And so they issued the marketing denial order. Now, Juul's a big company, owned in part by Altria, which is, owns the Marlboro brand. So they have a lot of money and a lot of experience with regulation. So Juul basically requested the Court of Appeals for a temporary stay with the marketing denial order, which means that was like the next day, which means that they can still sell their products until their position is heard through the courts. So that was the day after the marketing denial order was issued by the FDA.
So what I'm hearing is that they weren't satisfied that Juul was safe for people to consume.
No tobacco product is going to be safe. So that's not the standard. For pharmaceutical products, they have to be safe and effective. Doesn't apply to tobacco products because that's impossible. So they're not looking at safety, but what they are looking at is the benefits versus the risks. And for tobacco products, they don't only look at that for an individual, like what are the benefits and harms to the individual currently using the product, but they have what's called a public health standard. And the FDA also has to look at the impact at the population level, which is really exciting for public health. And that means they have to take into account what the impact of these products might be on people who are not using the product. So, for example, they can consider the impact on kids who aren't using any tobacco product. What would they potentially use this product and get addicted to nicotine? So they can take that into account. Or for people who have quit cigarette smoking, might they be lured into using this product? So the FDA takes a very big public health picture of determining what products they're going to allow to be sold.
So vaping devices have been very popular, especially with teenagers. I imagine that's not what the company said it was going to do when it came out. I mean, it was going to be a smoking cessation device, and now it has a pretty big following, especially among teenagers. I'm wondering if that is playing into this as well.
So the FDA will take into account the evidence on the harms to the public's health, including the impacts on youth. That's not what they focused on in their marketing denial order, though. And to be fair, Juul did pull all their sort of fun flavors off the market voluntarily. So their mango and creme brulee, things like that. They took that off the market. And at that time, other brands became more popular among kids because they were allowed to use all those fun flavors. So the first popular one after Juul is something called Puff Bar. So they had all these colors and flavors, and it continues to evolve. There's always the new thing that comes out on the market. So Juul had already lost some market share and some following by the time the FDA has ruled on their products. But given that the FDA had allowed tobacco-flavored e-cigarette devices for a couple of other companies, that was sort of the expectation in this case.
So was all flavors out?
So for Juul, the FDA had decided not even menthol and not tobacco flavored Juuls.
Mm-hmm. What about other companies?
And there are a few other companies that they have allowed, like brands like Logic and Vuse. There are a few others where they have allowed tobacco flavored e-cigarettes to be sold. There's not that many. It's a handful, but they have issued marketing orders, which means they can be sold. And the FDA, just to point out, they're very clear that they're not saying they approve these products. They're definitely not saying they're safe. They are issuing marketing orders. They are allowed to be sold. That's the FDA's position.
Is this seen as a step to banning e-cigarettes?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think so. I mean, there are a lot of other things that the FDA has talked about and is considering. One of them is getting rid of menthol from cigarettes. And that's really exciting because the public health community has been waiting for that for a long time. All flavors are banned from cigarettes, but they left menthol. And of course, the tobacco companies have targeted their menthol marketing to African American and other communities that have created a lot of disparities. And it continues a lot of health inequities. So we're all waiting hopefully for menthol to be banned. And the other thing that the FDA has talked about, which they are allowed to do, is reducing the level of nicotine significantly in cigarettes, which should make them less addictive. And the FDA had originally sort of presented this comprehensive regulatory framework for nicotine and tobacco products, saying that if you're going to reduce the nicotine in cigarettes and make them less addictive and appealing, it's felt that users will maybe need to find nicotine somewhere else, and that e-cigarettes could potentially fill that role as people transition off of cigarettes. It's all hypothetical at this point, but that's sort of the theory. So I think at this point, the FDA doesn't want to fully ban e-cigarettes, but certainly not have them as appealing as they have been to youth.
Was this sort of a can of worms, like that people, that it was sold as the smoking cessation product, but really it's a whole new generation of people are vaping?
Yeah, it's a tragedy. And part of the reason for that is that it was the Wild West with no regulation for too many years, because there was a long delay in terms of when companies had to submit their applications to allow to be sold, many years. And the market for e-cigarettes just proliferated. There's been all these flavors, innovation, shape, sizes, all kinds of things. And, the horse is out of the barn, and it's really hard to go back from that. So it truly is a tragedy. And I think if, it could have done it better.
So let me ask you this. So I know a lot of people have quit smoking over the decades, and I know many people have taken up vaping in the recent decade. Tell me, we have cut down on the number of smokers, however, I imagine, among these two groups generally.
Yeah, and that's terrific. Smoking rates are going down, which is a good news story.
And so what can they do to make it go down even further?
Well, there's still a lot we can do. Obviously, policy interventions are very effective. So continuing to increase the price of cigarettes through cigarette taxes. We still don't have clean indoor air laws in all of our states. That's where you have no smoking in public places. Not all Americans have that protection from secondhand smoke. So we have a long way to go with that. There are all kinds of, there's coupons that tobacco companies give to reduce the actual price of cigarettes. There's all this advertising that happens particularly at the point of sale. You go to a convenience store, a gas station, you see tons of advertising. And of course, the products are, right at the cash. So everywhere you see them clearly. And, we've made progress with flavors, which is great, but there's still the menthol to do. So that's going to be an important step. And we're still waiting in this country for decent health warning labels on our cigarette packs. This is another thing we're waiting. The FDA is supposed to be moving forward, but it's taken a very long time because tobacco companies have interfered in the process and have delayed action. So we're waiting for that. So all of those things are really important. And then the other thing is to continue to, making cigarettes as unappealing as possible. Some countries put cigarettes in what we call plain and standardized packaging. So there's no branding, no marketing on the packs. They're just what I call a fecal brown color. Every brand name is in the same font and font size. So, that's what you should do for a product that kills half of its long-term users. And then, potentially taking nicotine or reducing nicotine to non-addictive levels. That's an experiment. We don't know how well that's going to work, but hopeful, it's a theory, and we'll see what happens. But obviously, nicotine is problematic. And then we still have a big need to develop better and more appealing smoking cessation interventions for people. We have, pharmaceutical products, we have nicotine replacement therapy that are effective, but they could be much more effective. And the irony is that, cigarettes that are the most harmful tobacco product have the least number of regulations on them. And nicotine replacement therapy, for example, which is the least harmful form of nicotine, has the most regulations because they're regulated as a pharmaceutical product. So it's completely upside down. It doesn't make sense. And we have to do things that will make the very safe forms of nicotine, like nicotine replacement therapy, more appealing to people who are interested in quitting, which will help make it more effective.
When you and I were kids, our parents smoked, everybody smoked, there was smoking everywhere. There was even the first high school I went to had a smoking lounge. That is just so foreign, I think, to today's youth. But my question is this, and maybe I'm hoping you can answer this, or at least provide insight. Why do people start smoking in 2022, knowing what they know?
Well, the great news is the new generation isn't really starting smoking. We continue to see the numbers going down, which is a true success story. And I think that one of the reasons why we've been so successful, these kinds of behaviors changes take time. And it's the whole environment that is important. And as kids are not seeing smoking in workplaces, restaurants, bars, their schools, as you say, Stephanie. That's key. And they've been educated. They know it's harmful. So we're continuing to see the numbers go down, and it's fantastic. What is worrisome, and this is what you raised right at the beginning of our conversation, is that kids aren't seeing vaping products in the same way as cigarettes because they were told cigarettes are harmful. They understand that, but this is a whole different product. You don't light it on fire, and so they're not equating e-cigarettes with cigarettes, getting addicted. And, kids experiment. That's what they do. But there's some evidence that some people who do get addicted want to continue getting their nicotine and then might go on to cigarettes. And that is definitely a place we don't want to go. So I think no one should be using e-cigarettes at all, except for cigarette smokers who want to quit smoking. If they've tried other things that haven't been helpful, try the e-cigarette. You don't want to be smoking cigarettes, but no one else at all should be using e-cigarettes.
Joanna Cohen, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Public Health on Call is produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinell, Spencer Greer, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Holes Fernandez and Amber Bryan Singletary. Thank you for listening.